The most decorated female medical evacuation pilot in Vietnam, she was dubbed the Shadow Angel of Saigon. However, Margaret Holloway was only the elderly and gentle librarian who lived in the old colonial home on Maple Street in Ironridge, Montana. Before they made the most significant miscalculation of their lives, the Los Diablos cartel had been terrorizing their small Montana hamlet for months, believing they owned these streets. Dante Reyes and his crew believed they were simply threatening another elderly woman when they set fire to the American flag outside Maggie's house. This flag had flown over innumerable rescue missions in Vietnam. The vicious lieutenant of the cartel was unaware that this reserved 75-year-old was going to make a single phone call that would call forth an army of more than 300 battle veterans who owed her their lives. Within a day, Ironridge would be the scene of a remarkable tale of redemption in which the greatest significant change in a cartel would result from their worst act of contempt. Let's have a little rest. Please let us know where you are tuning in. Remember to subscribe if you enjoy this type of content, since tomorrow's story will be something very exceptional. As Margaret Holloway went about her daily routine with practiced accuracy, the early sun cast long shadows across Maple Street in Ironridge. She carefully affixed the American flag on the pole outside her colonial home with old hands that remained steady despite the years. Even though the flag itself had seen better days and had some fraying around the edges from years of use, Maggie thought it was still as new as the day it was given to her. Absently wiping the same spot on her counter, Rose McCarthy watched from her diner across the street. Her voice had a warmth that belied her rising concern over recent changes in their town. "Maggie, coffee's getting cold," she yelled out. With military accuracy, Maggie tied the last knot and turned to face the dining. "Rose, some things cannot be hurried. Certain tasks must be completed correctly." Few people in the town had ever noticed the steely undertone in her lovely voice. Hannah Mitchell sipped her refreshing coffee at McCarthy's restaurant as the morning sun caught her deputy chief's badge. 3 black SUVs rolled past Maggie's house, their tinted windows concealing their occupants but not their threat, and her gaze followed them. "They're getting bolder," Hannah mumbled as Maggie walked into the diner, the 4th time this week. Maggie took her customary stool and moved with the same dexterity that she had displayed with the flag. Rose's hands trembled a little as she set a fresh cup of coffee in front of her. "Maggie, yesterday afternoon they were in here. There were 6 of them. Frightened my customers to death. Problem?" Though it sounded like she already knew the answer, Maggie asked. Rose paused, looking out the window. "They will be receiving special treatment going forward, according to their leader, Snake, who stated that it is for their protection." The final word was a terrified and resentful one. General James Steele walked in, his outfit immaculate in spite of the early hour, as the bell above the diner's door chimed. After giving each woman a nod in turn, he took a seat beside Maggie. "Good morning, ladies. Let's say you've heard about Martinez." Maggie encircled the coffee cup with her hands. "Yesterday, Carlos made a comment. Vandalism?" Hannah sighed and took a refill of coffee from Rose, saying that was putting it gently. "Broke all of his store's windows. One of their calling cards was left. His door was engraved with a serpent. This month's 3rd business." "It was the pharmacy first," Rose said softly. "Kelly's petrol station comes next." "This now?" James's mouth clenched. "They're intelligent. People are too afraid to testify anyway, and there is never enough evidence to support charges." Maggie examined her image in the dark surface of the coffee. "James, fear is a curious thing. Causes people to lose their identity. What they can accomplish." Speaking from personal experience? Though it sounded like she already knew the answer, Hannah asked. Looking off into the distance, Maggie saw something that was much beyond the diner's boundaries. "I had a young lieutenant in my battalion back in 1968. Fearful of his own shadow, green as spring grass. We were trapped outside Saigon by the VC. It was the worst fighting I had ever witnessed. The day, the lieutenant discovered something within himself. Something more powerful than dread. How did he end up? Rose whispered. Maggie's features broke into a faint smile. He was in charge of a special forces training center when I last heard from him. He was not defined by fear. He did in response to that. Outside, the sound of engines increased in volume. They observed two black SUVs parked just in front of Maggie's house through the window. Dante Snake Reyes emerged wearing a pricey suit that was out of place in a tiny hamlet. He purposefully knocked over Maggie's garden gnome, which the neighborhood kids had given her. He shouted, "Better clean that up, abuela," his voice echoing through the diner windows. I would hate for someone to trip and get harmed. Maggie seemed unfazed by the intimidation, as she carried on drinking her coffee. However, Hannah became aware of the whitened knuckles surrounding the cup. Silently, James stated, "They're pushing, testing boundaries, seeing who will break first." "Chief, is that how you view it?" Maggie's voice didn't waver. Hannah looked up at her. "What do you think, Maggie?" "I see men who believe that fear equates to respect and who mistake brutality for strength." Leaving money for her coffee, Maggie got up carefully. "Men like that don't stop pushing until they hit something substantial, as I learned long ago." Rose called after Maggie as she made her way to the door. "How are you going to respond, Maggie?" Her hand was on the doorknob as she hesitated. "Rose, I do the same thing every morning. Take care of my yard, fly my flag, and never forget who I am." For a brief period, they noticed something in her eyes as she turned to face them. It was a quiet resolution that moved mountains, not rage. The question is, will this town remember who it is when the time comes? With a soft chime, the door shut behind her. Through the window, they observed Maggie crossing the street and passing the smirking cartel guys without a word. Slowly but deliberately, she started to pick up her fallen garden gnome. "I sometimes forget what I used to be," Rose replied quietly. She was just Maggie, the librarian, before. Hannah's expression was serious. "If current events continue, we may all be reminded in the near future." The stars and stripes that were still flying triumphantly over Maggie's house were caught in the light of the rising morning sun as it rose higher over Ironridge. The flag swayed softly in the Montana wind, casting a shadow over the road like a line in the sand, a line that, if crossed, would alter everything. Through high-end sunglasses, Dante Reyes sat on top of his black Mercedes SUV and observed Maggie's colonial home. His platinum watch and the snake-shaped ring on his right hand gleamed in the morning sun. For cartel soldiers waited in their cars behind him, their engines running with rapacious patience. As she arranged books for her afternoon reading program with neighborhood kids, the elderly woman could still be seen inside through the front window. Her cardigan was emblazoned with a tiny American flag pin, just another of her incessant patriotic gestures that had started to irritate Dante. From the passenger seat, Adrian Rodriguez rolled an unlit cigarette between his fingers and mumbled, "She's either stupid or brave. She acts as if we don't even exist, while everyone else in town is falling in line." Dante shifted, making his Italian leather jacket crack. "It doesn't really matter when time we spoke with our amiable local librarian." Rose reached for the phone in McCarthy's diner, her hand shaking. Hannah Mitchell gently touched her to stop her. The deputy chief said, "Don't. Maggie is skilled at what she does." As Dante moved toward Maggie's front porch, the cartel members dispersed, their actions bearing the unassuming threat of circling wolves. They could see Maggie through the window, presumably unaware of them, quietly putting books into her bag. Dante yelled out in a mock political tone, "Nice morning for reading stories, abuela." With her library bag slung over her shoulder, Maggie walked out of her house slowly. "It's nice every morning when you're helping kids learn," she said, glancing at her front door lock instead of the guys around her. Dante moved in closer, towering over her with his height. "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk about. Some people in town have learned their lesson, you see." They now know how things operate. However, you. He extended his hand and touched her cardigan's flag pin. Regarding the natural order of things, you appear perplexed. The moment Maggie's attention shifted from his hand to his face, Dante unconsciously retreated a step. It's funny, natural order, my son. People who think they understand nature are often surprised by it. Dante held up a stopping hand as Adrian stepped closer, reaching inside his jacket out of impulse. His grin was as icy as steel in the winter. For someone your age, living on borrowed time, those are harsh words. Maggie said, time is a gift, and started to move past them in the direction of the library. How you use it is what counts. Dante quickly reached out and grabbed her arm. Old woman, no one leaves me alone. Adrian would subsequently find it difficult to describe what transpired next because it happened so fast. Dante was holding Maggie's arm 1 second, then he was staggering backward with his wrist twisted at an unnatural angle. Maggie was standing in the same position as before, her body erect as though nothing had occurred. There are two types of people in this world, she added softly, son. Those who have to learn the hard way and those who are aware when they are outmatched. She glanced at each member of the cartel. Which sort are you, I wonder? In startled quiet, Adrian watched Maggie leave, walking at a leisurely pace and with her library bag still balanced neatly on her shoulder. With anger rising in his eyes, Dante rubbed his wrist. Adrian began, boss, perhaps we should, Dante's voice snapped like a whip. Tonight, we start with that blasted flag she loves so much and show this community what happens to those who don't treat others with respect. Those who knew Maggie well may have observed how she positioned herself to keep the entrance in view and how she selected a seat that afforded clear sight lines to all ways as she started setting up for the children's reading program inside the library. Her actions were as precise as ever. Hannah Mitchell came in, talking about what had happened and wearing a worried expression. Dante isn't the kind to overlook this. No, Maggie said, lining up the books in a tidy circle. Such men are never, pride prevents them from being. I could post officers. No, the best defense isn't always the most obvious one, Maggie's tone was tough yet gentle. Studying the elderly woman, Hannah noticed a change behind her composed appearance. You have a plan. Making plans? Just recalling, Maggie's smile held decades of secrets. Our battalion was surrounded and outgunned on a night in '68 outside of Saigon, and everyone declared us to be done. She used military accuracy to straighten the spine of a book. Sometimes having the strongest network is more important for winning than having the most firearms. Adrian Rodriguez watched Maggie lock up for the day as he sat in his car across from the library as the afternoon turned to nighttime. As he recalled what his grandmother had said about picking the correct path, his hand kept going back to the rosary she had given him, fingers fretting the beads. He could hear Dante organizing tonight's activity through his earpiece. They would set an example and send a message. Adrian couldn't get rid of the impression that something important was missing, though, as he watched Maggie go home with dignity and a straight back in spite of the threats surrounding her. The sky was painted in tones of gold and blood as the sun started to set over Ironridge. Though the shadow of violence gathered around it, Maggie's flag continued to fly proudly, moving gently in the evening air. Rose's hands gripped a phone she knew she would never use as she watched Maggie's house with concerned eyes in McCarthy's cafe. Maggie, what are you planning? She whispered. Maggie unlocked an ancient footlocker she hadn't opened in years in a remote workshop across town. A satellite phone and a battered notebook were found inside, under well-preserved photos of teenage soldiers in jungle fatigues. A number she had learned decades ago but never imagined she would need again was traced by her fingertips. Some debts never expire, she whispered to the empty room. As the night became darker over Ironridge, cartel cars started to pull into position with their headlights off and deadly intent. However, in her peaceful home, Maggie Holloway sat quietly at her desk with the satellite phone in front of her, anticipating the day when the past and present would meet and those who dealt in terror would discover a new kind of strength, one that was tempered by decades of quiet service and forged in the furnace of war. The pieces were in motion, the stage was set, and somewhere in the shadows a match was being lit that would light much more than a flag. It took us a long time to prepare and tell this story, so please subscribe to our channel if you find it entertaining, it means a lot to us. Let's return to the narrative. With the exception of sporadic lighting and the neon illumination from McCarthy's cafe, darkness descended around Ironridge like a thick blanket. Under the soft light of the desk lamp, Maggie sat in her study with an old photograph spread out in front of her. In it, she was a younger version of herself standing next to a Huey chopper with men she had saved. The picture clearly showed the flag hanging over the side of the helicopter, which presently flew outside her house. She traced the faces in the picture with her fingertips. As she waited for the enemy to move, she whispered, just like old times. 3 black SUVs gathered at the far end of Maple Street, visible through her window. Standing under a streetlight, Dante Reyes's cigarette smoke coiled around him like the coil of a snake. More cars were coming in, motors very silent, headlights out. Rose's hands trembled a little as she flipped the sign to closed inside McCarthy's diner. Standing next to her, Hannah Mitchell peered through the slats at the assembling cartel members. "Shouldn't we take action?" Rose muttered. Hannah's service weapon was in her hand. Maggie advised waiting, stating that time was crucial. As Dante's men took their positions, the sound of boots on pavement filled the night air. With his grandmother's rosary beads clicking lightly between his fingers, Adrian Rodriguez leaned back. He had been agitated by the elderly woman's composure over the day. "Remember," Dante said to his men, his voice echoing across the still night. "We're giving a lesson on consequences and respect." His snake ring glinted in the moonlight as he held up a can of gasoline. Maggie's face remained the same as she watched them come toward her house. She took out a used notebook and a satellite phone from her desk drawer. On the first page, a recognizable number was scrawled in a faded but readable ink. She suddenly became acutely aware of the memory. 1968 in Saigon. A unit of injured soldiers awaiting rescue, her helicopter encircled by hostile fire. Attempting the rescue was deemed suicide by everyone, but she had already called and assistance had arrived. Dante's voice pierced her recollections. "Take her out. Let her see this." Maggie got up slowly and walked carefully to the front door. Her flagpole was surrounded by a loose semicircle of cartel members outside. Dante was standing in the middle of it, holding a can of gasoline. He shouted out, "Last chance, abuela. Perhaps we should just take the flag rather than destroy it, and you should kneel and apologize for treating me disrespectfully this morning." Maggie stepped out onto her porch with her hands quietly clasped in front of her, her posture straight. Several cartel members became uneasy when they witnessed her poise in the face of such danger. Her voice, faint as it was, carried clearly, "Son. You are on the verge of making a life-altering error." There was a worried edge to Dante's laughter. "Old woman, look around. You're by yourself. Nobody is coming to assist you." "Boy, that's where you're mistaken." Even though Adrian couldn't identify it, he did see a slight change in Maggie's posture. Something tougher, something honed in battle, appeared to replace the peaceful librarian. "You see, there's something about veteran soldiers that you must comprehend." A faraway rumble started to rise as if on cue. It was a deeper, more structured sound than the snarl of cartel cars. Halfway near the flag, the gasoline can froze, and Dante's head snapped toward the sound. "We never forget our debts," Maggie added, her words bearing the weight of unwavering truth. "We never fight alone." At the end of Maple Street, emergency lights started to flash as the rumble got louder, but these weren't just local responders. Many of the trucks arriving were tagged with military stickers. "What on earth is this?" Dante's man insisted on backing up toward his SUV. This? Maggie was still grinning. The advance guard is all that is present. It's still 10 hours before the real army arrives. Every minute, more cars arrived, their occupants moving with military accuracy. These were combat veterans who moved as if they had never left the service, not weekend warriors or local militia. Adrian watched with increasing amazement as the cartel's edge vanished. They had just cornered a single elderly woman, but now they were up against a well-coordinated force that moved with skill. Dante's control facade faltered a little. "No way you could, you're bluffing." Maggie interrupted him after one phone call. "It only required that. I would like to remind my brothers that the flag you are going to burn is not just mine, it is our banner." As additional veterans climbed out of cars, Dante let go of the gasoline can. Their actions described training for decades and fought and won battles. "You have 10 hours, Maggie muttered. "There will be no more choices to be made when General Steele and the main troops arrive, so you have 10 hours to decide what type of men you truly want to be." When Dante saw something he didn't understand, his former confidence vanished, and he retreated. The unwavering composure of a woman who had endured intimidation far worse than that of midnight. In an attempt to keep things under control, he yelled to his troops to mount up. "Old lady, this isn't over." Maggie saw them go to their cars and said, "No. It's only the beginning." Hannah walked up to Maggie, surveying the scene as the cartel members ran away into the darkness. Before their own eyes, the gathered veterans, the unfurled flag, and the woman beneath it changed from librarian to warrior. Those men. Hannah, who was now protecting the area with military precision, nodded to the veterans. "They arrived really quickly. Hannah, I've been waiting a long time for my call. Certain debts are unrepayable. Certain bonds are unbreakable." There were other engines in the distance. A network of brotherhood that had lain dormant but never died drew in more veterans. Overhead, the flag fluttered. Aired in the night wind, its stripes and stars untouched by the fire that had tried to destroy it. As Maggie communicated with the arriving veterans, Adrian Rodriguez sat in his SUV and observed her through the windshield. He saw what they had all missed for the first time. Beneath the modest demeanor of a small-town librarian lay a warrior who had gained respect over the course of a lifetime of hard-won commitment rather than by intimidating others. Ironridge was about to discover what true strength looked like, and the night was far from done. The unwavering force of men and women bound together by honor, duty, and debts that outlasted time itself, not the fictitious power of intimidation. Dante Reyes paced his office's aged flooring while the La Zeta compound throbbed with anxious energy. He observed his soldiers enforcing the perimeter through tinted windows, their actions devoid of the normal assurance. The elderly woman's spirit was supposed to be broken by the burning of the flag. Rather, it had roused an inexplicable force within them. Marco, his security head, said that 40 cars had just rolled into town and crashed through the door. All of the veterans, forming up like a military unit. Dante then threw his glass of crystal whiskey against the wall. How? How could this many come so quickly from a single phone call? Adrian worked on his laptop in the corner, the blue glow of the screen shining on his face. "You have no idea what we're dealing with, boss. There is more about Margaret Holloway than meets the eye." He swiveled the screen in Dante's direction. One of the most effective medical evacuation units in Vietnam was commanded by 2 Silver Stars and 3 outstanding Flying Crosses. She was referred to as Saigon's Shadow Angel. Why? Dante snapped out of his control and demanded. She flew into hot spots that no one else would go near and specialized in difficult rescues. This is the mission report. Adrian looked over records that had been declassified. To save a platoon that was surrounded, she flew through the most intense anti-aircraft fire ever documented during the war. Everyone claimed it was suicide. She went nonetheless, and that day she saved 20 men. Marco cleared his throat after being silent up to this point. When I was in Vietnam, my tia used to tell me about a pilot who, in the face of intense fire, managed to pull out his entire unit. She claimed to have flown through hell to save them. Adrian said, "That's not the worst part. James Steele, the general she called, is in charge of 3 states' largest veteran network. Boss, these aren't merely seasoned veterans. They have chapters all around the world and are well connected and structured." As the ramifications set in, Dante's expression worsened. Their reputation had been established on fear, based on the belief that their targets would always be more vulnerable and terrified. However, now, with the same taciturn authority she had employed in battle, Maggie stood across town in front of her colonial house, guiding incoming veterans. Domestic order had been replaced by military precision, and her home had evolved into an improvised command center. Rose McCarthy came over with sandwiches and coffee. "You must eat something, Maggie." Spent hours standing there. "Regards, Rose." She waved away the food but accepted the coffee. Too many men were too preoccupied with their appetites to notice crucial facts. 3 cars with battle veteran patches on their drivers rolled up. The lead driver, a seasoned man in his 60s, got off his horse and strode toward Maggie. "Ma'am, Master Sergeant James Cooper. We were dispatched ahead by General Steele. Your advance recon is us." Maggie acknowledged the strategic maneuver and nodded. "Sergeant, it's good to have you. The town is roughly 4 miles in size. Behind the former lumber mill, Diablos controls the north end of the site." As Maggie described the problem, Mac Cooper produced a map and other veterans gathered nearby. After decades of training, their formations and answers came naturally to them, as if they had never left the army. From her cruiser, Hannah Mitchell watched in awe as Ironridge changed into something that looked like a military operation. Every hour, more veterans showed up, and each group blended in well with the expanding army. Rose served coffee to a mix of new veterans and villagers in McCarthy's cafe, which was being used as an informal briefing room. Stories were being told, and the mood had changed from fear to cautious hope. An older veteran addressed the assembled gathering. "I was there. 68, stuck behind enemy lines outside Saigon, with no way out. We were done for," everyone claimed. Then, out of nowhere, this helicopter shows up and begins to fly through the most intense fire I have ever seen. That day, Maggie Holloway pulled 20 of us out and said, "This is what sisters and brothers do," without ever asking for anything in return. As other veterans arrived, similar tales circulated across the cafe, each bearing a unique recollection of the modest librarian who had led incredible missions, saved lives, and never sought fame. A young veteran with a heated face hurried inside the diner. "The highway is packed with them, there must be 50 more cars traveling in this direction." Cooper and Maggie stood outside looking at the town map. Silently, she whispered, "They'll try something before the main force arrives. Dante can't wait because of his pride." "Let them try," said Cooper glumly. "Our military experience with that chemical spans 30 years. Do these cartel youths wish to pretend to be soldiers? Let us demonstrate to them the appearance of actual soldiers." A veteran came running up. "Movement at the compound, ma'am. It appears like they are dispersing into smaller groups and going in separate directions." Maggie's gaze grew strained. "They are testing our reaction time and exploring our defenses." She looked across at Cooper. "Recall Hill 149. The same idea." Cooper smiled. "Never forget, ma'am, like riding a bike." He started giving commands, and veterans responded to the cartel's maneuvers with well-honed efficiency. Dante watched his scouts leave the facility, attempting to restore control of a situation that was getting out of hand. He commanded them to identify their weaknesses. "There is too much for these old-timers to cover." Adrian stirred uneasily. "Boss, perhaps we might think about retreating and enlisting the aid of other cartels." Dante blew up, "We are the help. People are afraid of us. I refuse to let some old war artifacts deprive me of it. However, his typical conviction was absent from his statements. He could see more veteran vehicles coming in through the window, all in excellent formation and with a definite goal. They were not weekend warriors feigning toughness. These were people who had actually fought and died, and they had come out stronger. Maggie took another look at the old photo at her home office. The young men and women who had discovered the true meaning of fraternity in the furnace of combat stared back at her. Steele checked in as the satellite phone rang. "Maggie, how is it looking?" "James, it's like old times. They are trying to find our weaknesses. Similar to the VC at Kaysen. Do you recall what you said to me that evening? What distinguishes fighters from soldiers?" Maggie grinned a little. "Soldiers must battle for their lives. Warriors fight because they know why it's necessary. We're 300 strong and 3 hours out. Are you able to hold?" Through her window, Maggie observed as veterans moved with trained accuracy, taking up positions, setting up communications, and turning Ironridge into a stronghold. "We'll hold, I see. These boys will soon discover the distinction between genuine strength and intimidation." At the approach of midnight, Ironridge held its breath. The first investigation by the cartel came from the east. 5 black SUVs are attempting to evade the veterans' perimeter while running in the dark. After 3 blocks, they discovered that parked trucks strategically placed along the road obstructed their way. More cars stealthily shifted into position behind them as they turned to pursue a different path. Cooper watched from his high vantage point, muttering into his radio like fish in a barrel. "Maggie, exactly like you said. They are not troops, they are thugs." As serene as ever, Maggie's voice crackled back. "Men are predictable because of their pride." "How many?" 12 men and 5 cars are looking really anxious now that they know they are confined. The members of the besieged cartel huddled together in a close circle, their whispered disagreements audible in the darkness. One snarled to their leader, "Hey, Faye, this was a mistake. We are not dealing with ordinary people. We're playing checkers, and they're playing chess." Bright lights suddenly flooded the street from all sides before his partner could react. While their viewers were concealed in darkness, the cartel members were lighted from every direction. Cooper's voice, with its distinct tone of military command, pierced the night. "Gentlemen, I advise you to carefully evaluate your future course of action." Dante strolled uneasily at the Zeta's property, waiting for news. Even through the distortion, the voices of his trapped troops crackled on the radio, their terror palpable. "Boss, they've got us encircled. They're moving like a real military unit, these veterans." Adrian saw the darkening of Dante's face. He whispered that we should pull everyone back. "While we can, regroup." Dante threw a chair across the room and shut up. "I will not allow any old-timers to portray us as weak." "Too late for that," Marco mumbled, drawing Dante's homicidal look. With the same taciturn efficiency she had employed in Vietnam, she oversaw the veterans' movements at Kat's house across town, which was now the command center. With communication devices and maps on every surface, the living room had been converted into a tactical operations center. A seasoned radio operator said, "The Echo team reports movement from the north. This time, the gang is larger. Perhaps 15 cars." With her thoughts calculating angles and choices, Kat studied the map. "They are attempting to overrun a portion of our perimeter out of desperation." Her radio was keyed. "The major thrust is coming from the north, therefore keep an eye on your flanks, all troops. This is most likely a distraction." With her eyes enlarging at the operation's sophistication, Rose came in with new coffee. "Half the town has come to my diner, Kat. They're curious about what's going on." Without taking her eyes off her chart, Kat answered, "Tell them to stay inside. This is going to become more complicated." The sound of motors roaring from the north seemed to confirm what she had said. However, these were no longer the covert methods of the past. This was a full-on attack, with the cartel reportedly foregoing tact in favor of force. Cooper's voice crackled across the radio, "Here they come. 15 fast-moving cars. Pure speed, no tactical formation." Kat's voice held steady, just as we had hoped. "Permit them to finish the initial line." They realized they were being directed, not evaded, and their whoops of Dante died in their throats as the charging cartel cars sped past the first veteran positions. Side streets were abruptly forced down a predefined path by steel wires that unexpectedly pulled taut across them. "Now," Kat ordered. Veterans moved with coordinated precision as they emerged from alleys and doorways. At intersections, police cars pulled up with flashing lights. The cartel's charge was surrounded and contained in a 4-block radius in a matter of seconds. "What on earth is this?" A cartel member who was trapped made a demand. "This is what true tactical planning looks like," Kat said, her voice echoing as she came into view. Surrounded by men and women who moved with the lethal grace of well-trained troops, the elderly veteran stood quietly in the street. There was no more obvious contrast between their orderly presence and the cartel's disorderly charge. "Last chance," Kat said. "Give up your cars and go on. No charges, no repercussions. You'll see why we were dubbed the Shadow Unit in Vietnam if you keep fighting." Suddenly, a younger cartel member, just 20 years old, gunned his engine and charged straight toward Kat. 3 veterans moved in perfect unison before anyone could react. In a matter of seconds, the front wheel of the car was swept out, the driver was skillfully restrained, and the whole thing was over. "That's one option," Kat said gently. "Does anyone else wish to take on combat experts who have honed their skills over decades?" Dante listened with increasing desperation to the radio calls from his troops back at the complex. He cried into the radio, "Fall back. Everyone retreats." However, it was too late. This was also what the veterans had anticipated, blocking escape routes with the same military accuracy that had imprisoned them. Members of the cartel were forced to make decisions one by one. Give up or intensify your conflict with opponents who are obviously superior to you. Marco's voice trembled a little, "Boss. The North team is no longer in contact with us. The East team is encircled. This isn't functioning." Adrian saw Dante's world fall apart. Fear and intimidation were the foundations of his power, yet these veterans appeared impervious to both. Even worse, with every flawless move, they were methodically destroying the cartel's reputation. Through the windows of McCarthy's cafe, the villagers observed how the veterans effectively restrained the cartel's attempted display of force. With awe on their expressions, Hannah Mitchell stood with Rose and other people. "My God," said Rose in a whisper. "Watch them move as though they've been doing this for years." Hannah said, observing with professional admiration, "They have some abilities you never forget, but not here, and not recently." Maggie's voice could be heard over the radio once more, speaking to the cartel members who were encircled. 2 hours have passed since General Steele's main army left. This ends in one way or another when they get there. How it ends is up to you." The members of the stranded cartel exchanged glances, their customary bluster giving way to uncertainty. They were accustomed to being the predators rather than the victims. They were now ensnared in a trap set by both men and women who had studied their craft at the most rigorous institution. As other cartel members turned themselves in, Adrian watched from his hiding place as the sound of firearms striking asphalt spread out like falling dominoes. He realized what they had overlooked in Maggie as he watched her lead the operation. This was a legend who had never ceased to be a warrior, not just an elderly woman who had fought in a war. The first engagement of the evening was coming to a conclusion, but Adrian knew it was only the beginning. For the first time, Adrian questioned whether Dante was on the wrong side of history, even though his pride would demand retribution. They had just seen what true power looked like from the silent librarian. The power of disciplined strength and unbreakable bonds, not the power of fear. As veterans sorted the detained cartel members, the first rays of dawn appeared above Ironridge. Cooper oversaw the operation with military effectiveness, categorizing the vehicles and weapons that were taken, while Hannah Mitchell took care of the legal paperwork. In addition to producing captives, the night's battle had destroyed the cartel's sense of invincibility. Cooper informed Maggie at the command center that 28 people had been apprehended and 6 vehicles had been seized. The majority of them are young, afraid, and have never encountered genuine opposition. With the same level of accuracy she had used when planning rescue operations in Vietnam, Maggie stood at the operations map and marked revised positions. What about the others? Dante's Lieutenant Marco was among the 5 that managed to return to the compound. Rose and other villagers fed and drank coffee with the veterans in McCarthy's Cafe, now a center for support, while exchanging information about cartel activity. Hope was taking the place of the fear that had kept the town immobilized for months. An elderly local informed the assembled audience that they had never seen anything like it. It was like seeing a dance they had practiced their entire lives, the way they moved and collaborated. A counter-veteran grinned. "We have, which is why. You never forget certain things." Dante's anger permeated the command room at the cartel complex like poison gas. Papers and maps, the victims of his most recent rage, were scattered across the floor. How? He made no special demands of anyone. How did they foresee each step? Adrian stood in the corner, his choice becoming more and more clear. He said softly, "Because they've done this before. It's against armies, not cartels." "What were you saying?" Dante's voice fell threateningly. "Have you been researching Cat Holloway more? Discovered Vietnam mission reports? The strategies they employed last evening? The same ones she used to evacuate units that were surrounded by intense fire? She's not merely opposing us. They are being taught by her. Educating them to meet her requirements." Marco drank a cup of coffee and tended to his bruised pride. "Chief, they're more than just aging veterans. They are her veterans. People who owe her their life, both men and women. That type of loyalty cannot be broken by fear." Dante threw his hand down on his desk. "Then we use blood to shatter it. Give our Mexican connections a call. I want heavy weapons and professional soldiers. We will demonstrate to them what true war looks like." Adrian, however, had given up listening. He saw more veteran automobiles pull up through the window, their moves deliberate and well-coordinated. He understood what he had to do when his hand once more found his grandmother's rosary. Kat got an update from her advance observers at the command center. One young veteran claimed hearing calls from cartels. Many of them. Mostly to Mexico. "Professionals are being called in," Kat said, nodding. "Excellent. Simplifies our work." Cooper's eyebrow went up. "How do you calculate?" "Experts are aware when they are being outplayed. They do not compute ego, but odds. They'll realize what they're actually up against, unlike Dante." Hannah Mitchell came in with new insight. "I just picked up a few calls. They are bringing in military-grade heavy weapons." "Kat, this is getting worse." "It always would," Kat said coolly. "We're counting on men like Dante to lose gracefully, but they don't know how to do that." Outside, Adrian lifted his hands and walked toward the veteran perimeter. 2 seasoned operators emerged from the shadows, moving with the fluidity and efficiency of seasoned pros. He responded firmly, "I want to talk to Cat Holloway. She needs to hear what I have to tell her." Rose witnessed Adrian being led to the command center through the window of McCarthy's diner. She informed Hannah that was Dante's intelligence officer. "Why is he in this place?" Hannah said quietly, picking a side. At last. In what used to be her living room, Kat met Adrian. It had been converted into a military command post with maps and communication devices, but her serene demeanor had not changed. She pointed to a chair and said, "Sit. Why are you here, please?" Adrian's words were hurried. Dante has gone insane. The worst thing is that he is bringing in Los Diablos professional murderers, heavy weaponry, and special troops. He intends to divide your forces by attacking people and causing disorder. Kat's face remained unchanged. You're telling me this, but why? Because. After a moment of hesitation, Adrian took out his grandmother's rosary. There are two kinds of strength, according to my abuela, the sort that destroys and the kind that creates. The wrong type is what I've been serving. Kat's features broke into a small smile. It sounds like your grandmother was a wise woman. Like you, she was. She was respected without ever having to be afraid. With little practice, Kat answered the satellite phone when it chirped. All right, James. General Steele's voice crackled through from 90 minutes out. People lined the streets, observing us pass, and receiving updates from towns we've passed. News of what's going on in Ironridge is getting out. Good, said Kat. Give them a look. Let them know. She looked back at Adrian. You know what it means to switch sides. You can't turn back. Adrian nodded, I get it. After all, I've witnessed enough to decide which side I want to support. As the sun rose higher in the morning, veterans outside began to bolster their positions. Cooper coordinated with recently incoming units and seamlessly incorporated them into the defense. There was no more obvious contrast between their methodical planning and the pandemonium of the cartel. Dante was informed at the complex that his reinforcements were on their way. Everything he had asked for, heavy weaponry, professional killers. But as he peered through his binoculars at more veteran automobiles, a chill descended on him. These were no mere wartime reenactments. They were fighters who were always prepared for combat. Marco came warily up, boss. Adrian has left. Changed sides. There was an undertone of frenzy in Dante's laugh. Not important. We will demonstrate true power to everyone when our people arrive. If necessary, we will set this entire town on fire. However, General Steele's force approached even as he was speaking. 300 people, traveling with the military convoy's accuracy. Additionally, Kat Holloway was at her command center getting ready for the next stage of an operation that she had been organizing ever since Dante threatened her flag. The scene was set for an encounter that would definitively demonstrate the distinction between leaders who exercised power out of fear and those who exercised power out of respect. Among those who constructed things and those who destroyed them. The difference between those who battled for financial gain and those who fought for something much more valuable. The unshakable ties of true warriors, honor, and duty. 3 black helicopters emerged on the horizon as the early sun threw harsh shadows over Ironridge. Carrying Dante's reinforcements, Los Diablos' best soldiers, and enough firepower to demolish a small town, they flew quickly and low. Kat's attitude remained the same as she watched them approach from her command post. Like Caisson, she whispered. They believe that using overwhelming force is the solution. Adrian was standing next to her, giving her specifics about what was going to happen. Heavy armaments, such as mounted machine guns and explosives, 30 trained soldiers, and former Mexican special forces. Cooper nodded, good intel. However, you're overlooking something crucial. What is that? They're battling over money, Kat said coolly. Something else is what we're fighting for. When the helicopters touched down at the cartel property, they unloaded their load of guns and personnel. In sharp contrast to Dante's theatrical menace, their commander, Colonel Santiago, exuded professional military attitude. Report, Santiago insisted, looking through powerful binoculars at the veteran positions. Dante made an effort to be in charge. Santiago said, these old-timers have been, not you. He gestured at Marco. Marco took a deep breath. Every strategy is covered by them. Act as a military unit would. He paused, their commander. How about their commander? Holloway, Margaret. She was known as the Shadow Angel of Saigon and was an expert at performing impossible rescues while under intense fire. Santiago's face shifted a little. The Angel of Shadows? Are you sure? Indeed, sir. Additionally, she already has almost 100 veterans with her. Will there be more? Slowly, Santiago lowered his binoculars. He said, Dante, you didn't tell me we were facing her. This makes a difference. Why? Dante made a demand. They are only veteran troops. No, decades of military expertise were in Santiago's voice. You've angered these legendary people. As the professional troops of the cartel started to probe their defenses, Kat coordinated with her units in the command center. These were organized reconnaissance activities, as opposed to the haphazard attacks of the night before. Cooper stated that they are testing every section. Searching for areas of weakness. Let them look, said Kat. Adrian, explain the lumber mill strategy to them. Adrian bent down to look at the map. As a flanking path, they will attempt to use it. I would have recommended it. There were echoes of innumerable jungle operations in Kat's smile. That's right. Thus, we laid our trap there. At noon, the cartel launched a concerted three-pronged attack designed to divide the veteran forces, marking the beginning of a serious investigation. Although Santiago's soldiers moved with expert accuracy, they were up against opponents who had honed their skills in the most hostile battle zones on Earth. A seasoned radio operator said, "Contact south." A pair of mounted technicals. Another calls out, and the east sector reports movement. Infantry equipped with auxiliary weapons. A third speaker said, "West approach clear." It's too clear. With the same strategic vision that had saved so many lives in Vietnam, Kat examined the pattern. As expected, they're taking the timber mill route. Operation Rolling Thunder, Cooper. With lethal effectiveness, the trap was set. Santiago's soldiers were trapped in a well-planned death box when they forced their way through what they believed to be a hole in the veteran lines. With the kind of tactical dominance that forces combat veterans to surrender before blood is spilled, but not with deadly force. God's mother. As veterans emerged from hiding places, their actions demonstrating decades of training, one of Santiago's sergeants gasped. These are not retired people pretending to be soldiers. These are authentic. Townspeople observed the operation take place in McCarthy's cafe. It was unlike anything Rose had ever seen. The seamless synchronization, the quiet dialogue, and the unwavering confidence of those who had overcome much more difficult obstacles. Look at Kat, said Hannah in a low voice. She's not merely battling them. She is imparting knowledge to them. Adrian frequently demonstrated his value by foreseeing the cartel's strategies because he had assisted in their planning. Every time Santiago's troops attempted to execute a plan, they discovered that the veterans had previously thwarted it. It's not possible, Santiago said. Observing another assault against positions that had been prepared fail. They are aware of every move before we do. Since they have already produced them all. Over their radio frequency, Adrian's voice could be heard. When the opposition was more formidable and the stakes were higher. Colonel, get down. The spirits you're battling were trained in hell itself. The knowledge that they were up against veterans of a different caliber caused Santiago's professional soldiers to falter. They swept through terror and superior firepower, but this was not the typical local opposition. Cooper informed Kat that General Steele's force was 30 minutes out. The roar of oncoming traffic had intensified into a constant rumble, like distant thunder gaining intensity. Dante ran around the compound. Launch a full-scale assault. We cannot all be stopped by them. Santiago, however, raised his hand. Listen, he said softly. They could see them now, and the rumble was getting louder. Along the roadway, there is an unending line of cars traveling with military accuracy. A huge black SUV with 3-star generals' flags was in the lead. My God, said Santiago. How many? 300. Once more, Adrian's voice could be heard over the radio. Each and every combat veteran owes their life to the woman whose flag you attempted to set on fire. Calm as ever, Kat's voice came next. You have 5 minutes to turn over your troops, Colonel Santiago. You will then encounter men and women who have honed their military skills over decades. You have an option. Through his binoculars, Santiago had a final glimpse of the approaching force as well as the pinpoint accuracy of the veterans already positioned. He had fought a lot of wars, but he was able to recognize a losing battle. He told his men to stand down. We are experts. When we are outmatched, we are aware of it. Dante took hold of his arm. You can't. Our firepower is better. Santiago dismissed him with a professional sneer. Firepower is useless against experience, against fraternity, against. He pointed to the places of the veterans. Against specters who never lost their fighting spirit. The engagement of the morning had shown something significant. The distinction between those who battled for financial gain and those who did so for a more profound cause. Between those who carried their power, unity, and experience, and others who depended on weapons. Kat Holloway stood quietly in her command center, watching Santiago's troops drop their weapons as General Steele's force drew closer to Ironridge. What Dante couldn't comprehend, the expert soldiers of the cartel had learnt. The unbreakable ties of soldiers who had never forgotten what it meant to serve something bigger than themselves were the source of that true power, not fear or firepower. As General James Steele's convoy, consisting of 300 cars in perfect line, entered Ironridge, the ground seemed to tremble. With veterans riding motorcycles as if they had never left the service, Steele's black SUV led the way. An image of unstoppable force was created when the polished metal and chrome glinted in the morning sun. With the same composure she displayed during the crisis, Kat stood outside her command center and watched the arrival. Standing next to her, Cooper oversaw the incorporation of additional forces into their defensive positions. Like the old days, Cooper said. Better odds than Quezon, Kat said, grinning a little. As the caravan passed past their location, Santiago and his disarmed soldiers looked on in professional amazement. See that accuracy, he whispered, like a military operation rather than a citizen reaction. Adrian clarified, now acting as liaison, that's precisely what it is. These men and women are not merely veterans, they have been soldiers throughout their lives. All they needed was a good reason to remind them. With military precision, the lead vehicles of the convoy arrived to Kat's position and came to a stop. Even at his advanced age, General Steele's navigation was flawless as he stepped out of his SUV. He and Kat simply stared at one another for a minute, decades of mutual struggle and sacrifice slipping between their eyes. You couldn't simply retire quietly, could you? Steele inquired, his formal manner broken by a faint smile. James, you shouldn't have touched the flag. After a quick embrace, they got right to business. Steele followed Kat into the command center, where the situation was displayed on updated tactical displays. She said that Santiago's soldiers had surrendered. Professionals by trade, his troops knew when they saw a superior force. Dante, too. Unstable and confined to the property, they are phoning Mexico in an attempt to obtain additional assistance. Santiago, whose military background was now a strength rather than a liability, had been invited to the briefing. He won't get it, General, with all due respect. I've spoken to my supervisors already. He pointed at Kat when they realized who we were really up against. Assume for the moment that the cartel has no interest in going to war with U.S. veterans. In McCarthy's cafe, which was now a makeshift command center, Rose marveled at the steady stream of veterans passing through her doors. Each group effortlessly integrated into the operation, moving with the same disciplined goal. She told Hannah she had never seen anything like that. The way they collaborate, as if they can read one another's thoughts. Santiago replied, taking a coffee, that's what real training looks like. How true brotherhood looks. We believed ourselves to be experts, yet these folks. He gave a headshake. They are in a whole other league. Dante appeared to be losing his sense of reality at the cartel property by the minute. Ignoring Marco's attempts to reason with him, he paced wildly. With frantic eyes, Dante yelled, "You don't understand. They cannot prevail. Los Diablos is who we are. People are afraid of us." Marco tried again, "Boss. It's finished. The men of Santiago have given up. The pulling support of the cartel. We are up against 300 combat veterans who are legendary in the Vietnam War. Now we must consider survival. Living." There was an undertone of frenzy in Dante's laugh. "I'll demonstrate survival to them. I'll demonstrate to them what occurs when a snake is cornered." As he listened to radio broadcasts from the facility back at the command center, Adrian's face turned pale. "Dante has gone totally crazy, Cat. He is talking about capturing half the town, he is setting off explosives." Kat's face remained unchanged. However, there was a change in her stance. It was evident to those who had served beside her in Vietnam. The silent concentration before her boldest rescues. "James." She looked over at Steele. "Do you recall that evening outside of Saigon? The ammo storage facility?" Steele's eyes glowed with comprehension. "The same strategy. The same idea. Various stakes." She looked over at Santiago. "Would you like to be redeemed, Colonel?" Santiago stood up. "Tell me what you require." An operation within the next hour proved why Cat had become so well known in Vietnam. Veterans, whose movements were synchronized by decades of training, moved into position with studied stealth. Now working with them, Santiago's guys supplied vital information on the layout of the compound. Adrian reported that Dante had wired the main building while keeping an eye on radio activity. "He has 2 blocks worth of explosives. Continues to ramble about demonstrating to everyone what true power looks like. Destructive power isn't what real power is," Kat said quietly. "It's all about accuracy. About understanding just when and how to respond." She looked over at Steele. "Every unit in place. As before, you are ready for your mark." Cooper came over with last-minute confirmation. "Secured perimeter. Areas for civilians were evacuated. We're prepared." Kat took one more glance at the tactical display, her mind calculating angles and possibilities like she had in previous battles. With its stars and stripes now symbolizing something greater than one woman's disobedience, the flag that had begun it all was still flying overhead. With a voice that carried the cool authority that had led soldiers through the worst of Vietnam, she keyed her radio and said, "All units. Put Operation Final Thunder into action. Keep in mind that we're not merely preventing damage. We are averting a catastrophe. Make precise movements. Make deliberate movements." With quiet and well-coordinated movements, the veterans started to approach the property. With 300 members, they walked through the Montana morning like shadows, ready to teach Dante the real meaning of power. The power of disciplined strength and unshakable solidarity, not the power of explosives and fear. For a brief minute, Kat allowed herself to recall another morning in which the stakes had appeared to be insurmountable as the flag caught the early wind. She understood, however, as she had back then, that defeating an adversary was not the true measure of success. Giving them a shot at redemption, even if they weren't aware that they needed it yet, was the goal. As Dante Reyes strode between makeshift explosive devices and muttered to himself, the property swam in pre-dawn shadows. Even though the morning air was chilly, his pricey shirt was colored by sweat. Adrian's increasingly rambling rant was conveyed to the veteran command post by the listening devices he had left behind. "Do you think they can just enter? Do you think this is in opposition to their valuable experience?" He gave an unsettlingly loving pat to a group of bombs. "Allow them to arrive. Bring them all. Kat listened calmly to Dante's tirade in the command center, just as she had done throughout the most intense firefights in Vietnam. Standing next to her, Santiago's expert evaluation validated their worst suspicions. He replied softly, "Those are military-grade explosives. The radius of blast. The town center would be reduced by half." Finally deciding to assist them, Marco added, "Not just explosives. He has also rigged the fuel storage tanks at the site. If those increase." He didn't have to complete the phrase. Marco gave Kat a complicated schematic, which she reviewed, considering angles and possibilities. "Remember that night in '68, James? The hospital that is surrounded?" Steele grudgingly nodded. "Similar configuration. It was wired to blow by VC. Forget about civilian casualties. How were we able to escape that one?" Intrigued by these tidbits of information about their common history, Adrian inquired. "She didn't." Steele smiled slightly in response. "We were admitted by her. They were transported back decades to a different evening when the stakes had appeared to be insurmountable by Kat's voice. A hospital full of injured people, encircled by VCs who had wired the entire facility. Everyone claimed that trying to save lives was suicide. However, occasionally, using the current map of the compound, she traced a path. Sometimes going straight into a trap is the best way to avoid it. Cooper worked with the seasoned squads that were now encircling the compound. Every group took their positions with the accuracy that came from decades of training, moving in practice quiet. Now collaborating with them, Santiago's former guys offered vital information about cartel responses and procedures. Marco, who was keeping an eye on the surveillance, stated that Dante was no longer thinking clearly. Keeps discussing shadows and stories and how to demonstrate to everyone what true power looks like. "Do 10 guys still accompany him?" Kat inquired. "They're afraid, yes. He had never been this way before. These people are no longer sincere believers. They are prisoners of his insanity." Kat could see the first glimmer of dawn touching the eastern sky through the windows of the command center. One last operation was about to be enlightened by the same light that had illuminated innumerable rescue missions in Vietnam. Cooper declared that all troops were ready to report. "I'm awaiting your purchase." With her speech soothing the 300 veterans now gathered around the facility, Kat pressed the key on her radio. "Recall your training. Keep in mind our purpose. Retaliation is not the point here. The goal is to avoid tragedy. About demonstrating that there is always an alternative." Adrian was astounded to see the veterans admit their lack of practice. No words were wasted. No grandiose claims. Just the serene assurance of others who had overcome greater adversity. He murmured to Santiago, "They're actually going to do this. They will make an effort to save everyone. Dante, too." "They certainly are," Santiago said. "That's the difference between them. What improves them?" Dante's increasingly insane commands buzzed on Marco's radio within the compound. "Keep an eye on everything. The legends and spirits are out there, believing that they can enter here as if they own the streets." Calm and clear over all frequencies, Kat's voice broke through his tirade. "This is your last chance, Dante Reyes. Give up now. Let your men go. And there is no bloodshed at the end of this." There was an undertone of frenzy in Dante's laugh. "Do you believe I'm scared of you? You are nothing. Just an elderly woman pretending to be a soldier." "No, son." With a voice full of hard-won knowledge, Kat answered. "There's nothing I'm playing. The 300 veterans that are presently around your position aren't either. We have all witnessed true conflict, true bravery, and true strength. What you're displaying right now is nothing more than fear masquerading as bravery." There was silence for a while. Then Dante's voice came back, this time with more depth. "Do you wish to discuss power? I'll demonstrate my might. I'll demonstrate to everyone what occurs when a snake is cornered. Steele and Kat both recognized the tone of a guy preparing to do something desperate, so Kat turned to face him. She ordered all units to carry out Operation Final Dawn. Make precise movements. Make deliberate movements. With a clear understanding of their respective roles, the veterans started to approach. It wasn't a frantic attack. The well-planned operation was the result of innumerable similar operations. Santiago observed the team's flawless synchronization with professional admiration. Symphony, he whispered. No, Kat said gently. Similar to a rescue effort. Because this is exactly that. We're not merely attempting to halt Dante. Our goal is to save him. Everyone should be saved. As the operation began, dawn continued to creep slowly across Ironridge. Standing in her command center, Kat coordinated movements with the same composed accuracy that she had displayed throughout her time in Vietnam. With its stars and stripes now signifying something greater than defiance, the flag that had begun it all was still flying aloft. They stood for optimism. Hope that there was always a way to be saved, even in the most hopeless circumstances. There is always a way to select a better conclusion. With Kat's strategic acumen guiding them, the veterans navigated the shadows. They weren't only getting close to danger. They were taking action to demonstrate that true strength was not determined by who could do the greatest damage. Who could stop it was the question. Ironridge held its breath as the final operation got underway. 300 veterans were ready to show what true power meant, not by using explosives or fear, but by applying discipline, experience, and the unbreakable bonds of warriors who had never forgotten what it meant to serve something bigger than themselves. As the veterans started their last approach to the facility, first light painted Ironridge in gold hues. With the weight of decades of war experience, they walked through the dawn mist like shadows. Through their radio network, Kat's voice could be heard clearly and softly, directing each crew with the same accuracy she had applied to many rescue operations. Keep your northern approach, Alpha Team. Keep an eye on those sight lines, Bravo. Ready on the east, Charlie. Without wasting words or making grandiose promises, each command was acknowledged with seasoned efficiency. Dante's surviving troops watched their security cameras inside the property with increasing fear. The veterans' maneuvers defied standard tactical patterns, as if they appeared and vanished at will. One guard, his fingers shaking on his trigger, said, "They're everywhere," similar to shadows. Dante yelled, his calm exterior as a cartel leader utterly destroyed. They are little more than old soldiers. However, more seasoned squads emerged from the morning shadows while he was speaking. The vicious attack Dante had anticipated was not their strategy, rather, it was a much more intricate ballet of pressure and position. Marco watched the monitors, and his voice trembled a little, "Boss. They are containing us, not attacking." As if they had previously done this. They jumped as Kat's voice could be heard clearly over their radio. "We have 1968 in Saigon. Your compound is like a hospital that has been set up with bombs. Are you curious about the outcome?" As she planned the action, the recollection struck her with a sharp clarity. VC snipers had encircled the hospital, covering every approach. The structure was wired to blow up. The wounded inside could not be saved, everyone agreed. Cooper brought her back to the present by reporting that Team 2 was in position. Every method is covered. Seeing the similarities between the past and present, Kat nodded. They believe the bombs offer them control, just like the hospital does. They're not understanding. Who wins is irrelevant to explosives. Through her headset, Adrian's voice was heard. "I can approach. I am aware of their blind spots." "No," Kat said emphatically. "There are no heroes nowadays, we follow the book." "Ma'am." Santiago spoke out, clearly demonstrating his professional knowledge. "He's employing their cartel standard for demolition charges. I am aware of their shortcomings. Show me. Pointing out areas of vulnerability, Santiago rapidly drew up the explosive layout. Kat studied it as intently as she had studied target maps in Vietnam. Cooper, shift the Alpha team 3 degrees to the east. She looked over at Santiago. Take the Bravo team, Colonel. Let them see what you know. Each team moved in perfect cooperation as the procedure proceeded with precise timing. As veterans took position after position, Dante saw his world shrink through the cameras on the facility. This is impossible for them. He yelled at the men he had left. Los Satas is who we are. They dread us. Kat's words echoed over their radios once more. Being feared does not equate to being strong. True power. Saving lives, not taking them, is the goal. About putting yourself last and standing for something greater. Adrian remembered hearing his grandmother say nearly the exact same thing years ago. He now realized what she had meant as he observed the veteran's methodical movements. In a final attempt to contact his former boss, Dante keyed his radio. Observe their movements. This has nothing to do with intimidation. Fear is not the issue here. This is the appearance of true power. Kat observed her teams continuing their cautious approach through the windows of the command center. The precision that came from hard-won experience was used to secure every position and calculate every action. Cooper declared that all teams reported their final positions. All set for the second phase. Picking up her radio, Kat spoke to each veteran in her position with compassion. Keep in mind that we are not seeking retribution. We are here to show that there is always another way and to stop a catastrophe. She took a moment to process the words. Even for people who believe they've gone too far. Through their radios, Dante's laugh crackled, but now it seemed more fearful than menacing. Do you really believe you can enter this place? Do you believe your experience contradicts this in any way? Through the transmission came the distinct sound of him arming a detonator. Kat's voice was steady, son. For better motives, I have ventured into more difficult situations. Whether we can stop you is not the question. Are you prepared to discover what true strength looks like? As the vital moment of the operation approached, the morning sun rose higher. While waiting for Kat's signal, 300 veterans remained in their stations. The stakes were equally great here, but they had encountered worse odds in more difficult situations. Not just lives, but the opportunity to demonstrate that there was always a way to be saved, even in the most hopeless circumstances. Kat peered through her binoculars as Dante paced his command area, his motions growing increasingly frantic. The dawn light fell on the detonator he was holding, a tiny instrument capable of causing a great deal of destruction. She whispered to herself, like Saigon, sometimes the hardest part isn't reaching the target. It's demonstrating to them the value of living. With their movements finally matching the veteran's accuracy, Santiago led his team into last place. He said, "Ready on your mark." As Kat took one final glance over the property, she saw echoes of every failed rescue she had ever tried in addition to the current situation. With its significance now more apparent than ever, the flag that had begun it all continued to fly overhead. With a voice laden with decades of war expertise, she ordered all units. Carry out the final dawn operation. Recall your training. Keep in mind our purpose. With the kind of accuracy that only comes from repeatedly facing death and choosing life, the veterans started their last approach. They weren't merely heading into peril, they were taking action to demonstrate that true power isn't about wreaking havoc. It's about being able to offer salvation to people who don't believe they deserve it. With surgical precision, the entry teams of veterans broke through the outer perimeter of the enclosure. Every step was taken with the assurance that came from innumerable combat missions, and every movement was planned. Like a conductor guiding an orchestra of shadows, Kat's voice led them through their earpieces and oversaw the intricate operation. Cooper reported that Team 1 had secured the east corridor. Let's go on to Step 2. Dante's exterior barriers broke down, and he observed through the security feeds. via a level of tactical skill he had never experienced, rather than via violence or physical force. His men were being confined and segregated in a methodical manner, frequently without their knowledge. What are they doing? Taking Marco by the collar, he made a demand. How are they aware of every step before we do? As veterans guarded another area, Marco saw another security stream go dark. Because they aren't engaged in combat with us, Jeff. We're being saved from you by them. As Dante pushed Marco away, the explosive shuddered in his grasp. Saving? I'll show them how to be saved. Marco's voice halted him as he approached the main bomb stash. What's actually going on here, do you know? They are demonstrating to us the appearance of true pros. When Marco drew his weapon, he pointed it at Dante rather than the oncoming veterans. For your pride, I won't allow you to murder us all. Leading a specialized team of veterans through the compound's hallways, Adrian's in-depth familiarity with the layout proved vital. He muttered, the next junction has pressure plates, but the ventilation system has a maintenance bypass. Together with another group, Santiago disarmed the explosives they came across in a methodical manner. His training in cartel demolitions now had a new use. According to him, these charges are connected in order. We can isolate the entire network if we locate the master control unit. Maggie's confident, steady voice could be heard over their communications. Cooper, do you remember Hugh City? The same idea. We're clearing alternatives and pathways, not just rooms. A veteran called gently, contact front. At a corridor juncture, 3 of Dante's men had positioned themselves, but they hesitated at the veteran's approach for some reason. One cartel soldier whispered to another, observe their movements. Like shadows, like. As if this has been done 1,000 times. Adrian appeared with his hands up. Since they have. Do you want to be the last to perish as a result of Dante's insanity? Or the first to assist us in stopping it? After glancing at their weapons and each other, the cartel warriors turned to watch the veterans move with such lethal ease. Their firearms fell to the ground. Maggie saw the action through several feeds in the command center. Every team worked in unison, carrying out a strategy that appeared to account for every possibility. However, she was well aware from personal experience that no plan can withstand encounter with an opponent in dire need. Cooper reported that Dante, who still has the primary detonator, is pushing farther inside the property with his core group. Marco declared that he had completely switched sides and was going to the backup position. We kept our backup ammunition in the underground storage area in case he set off the bombs there. Maggie scanned the compound schematic, her eyes narrowing. He is attempting to lure us in by setting a trap rather than running. Her radio was keyed. Hold positions and keep containment, all teams. Let's demonstrate to him what true patience entails. Suddenly, Dante's harsh, strained voice rang out throughout their radio network. Do you believe you have won? Do you believe your priceless experience has any significance? I have enough explosives down here to create a crater out of the entire facility. Son, Maggie's response was a testament to decades of battle experience. I could have purchased this town rather than retiring here if I had a $1 for each time someone claimed to have the ultimate weapon. Her voice grew a little softer. There is still time to select an alternative conclusion. A different conclusion. There was an undertone of frenzy in Dante's laugh. I'm writing the conclusion. Me. With this. There was a distinct sound as he armed the detonator. Adrian froze in the ventilation system above the storage space. He could see Dante and his last faithful preparing their final stand through a grate. Dante's trembling palm held the gleaming detonator. He muttered into his radio, "Ma'am. I have a direct line of sight." "I could," Maggie interrupted him. "That's precisely what he desires. Not knowing when to act is perhaps the most difficult aspect of fighting. It's being aware of when to wait." With a recognizable sparkle in her eye, she turned to face Cooper. Do you recall that Mekong Delta night? When we attacked them using their own strategies? Cooper smiled. Variant of position 3. Twisting it. Once more, Maggie keyed her radio. Get ready for Operation Echo Dawn, all teams. We will demonstrate to Dante the distinction between possessing power and being able to wield it effectively. The veterans started shifting into new roles, using a tactic that has worked in the world's most hostile fighting zones. They were not merely attempting to apprehend a lunatic. They wanted to protect him from himself. And Maggie Holloway got ready to prove once more that true strength doesn't come from threats or explosives as the morning sun rose higher above Ironridge. It can be found in having the forbearance to wait for the ideal opportunity and the discernment to realize that sometimes leading an adversary down a better path is the greatest way to defeat them. There was complete quiet when Operation Echo Dawn got underway. No sounds of activity, no radio talk. Simply the silent effectiveness of warriors who had honed their skills in the bloodiest battlegrounds on Earth. Dante watched as part after part of his cameras went dark across the security feeds of the compound. "They're interrupting us," muttered one of his surviving supporters. "Why don't they assault, though?" With his knuckles white, Dante tightened his hold on the detonator. The subterranean storage space had appeared to be the ideal protective location. It felt like a grave now. "They're scared," he said. But there was no conviction in his speech. "They are aware that we can destroy the entire establishment." "No," Maggie's voice could be heard on their final functional radio. "Son, we're not scared. All we can do is wait. Learn that lesson in the Mekong Delta the hard way. It's not always about who hits first to win. The question is who has a greater understanding of the battlefield." Adrian escorted a group of veterans into the maintenance tunnels in the ventilation system above them. Having managed cartel operations for years, he was intimately familiar with every secret passage. He muttered, "Next junction has motion sensors. However, the power backup has a 3-second lag." In order to methodically isolate Dante's explosive network, Santiago worked with another team and applied his knowledge of demolitions. He claimed that his control decreased with each portion we disconnected. He could not even be aware that it's taking place. Maggie viewed many channels in the command center that displayed the operation's progress. "Cooper, do you recall how we overpowered their own bunker system that night outside Da Nang?" "This is the same principle," Cooper said. "They believe they are safe since they are underground." Maggie concluded, "Until they realize they're not in a fortress. They're enclosed in a box." The rest of Dante's troops jumped at every sound and shadow in the distance. The psychological strategies employed by the veterans were working as planned. They had not anticipated such vicious attacks. It was something far more advanced. One cartel soldier shouted as he fired at shadows in the east corridor. Only concrete was struck by his gunfire. "Hold your fire," said Dante. But you could hear the tension in his voice. "Their goal is to force us to squander munitions." "No," it was Maggie's voice on the radio once more. "We're teaching you the difference between owning a weapon and knowing how to use it, between firing and fighting." Dante saw with increasing terror through his surviving cameras as veterans appeared and vanished as they pleased. Every defensive stance he had built was being methodically undermined, not by direct attack, but by knowledge he was unable to match. One of his guys murmured, "Their shadows similar to the tales of her in Vietnam." "They're not specters." They were unaware of the existence of the concealed speakers that carried Adrian's voice. They are actual professionals, troops who know that patience and accuracy are the keys to true strength rather than individuals who resort to violence and terror. Santiago's squad isolated another portion of explosives, completing another part of their operation. He reported that the master control unit had been discovered and was prepared for the last stage. Adrian's squad arrived at their assigned spot in the ventilation shaft. They could see Dante's remaining force becoming more and more unstable every minute through the grates. The anticipated effect of the psychological pressure was being achieved. Maggie said, keep them contained. Give them the sensation of the walls closing in. Fighting isn't always the most difficult aspect of conflict. It is allowing time for your adversary to recognize that they have already lost. With his perspiration now slickening the detonator, Dante walked wildly. He couldn't understand the strategy being used, but every video feed showed the same thing, veterans moving with unfathomable accuracy, each unit just where it needed to be. Perhaps we ought to, boss, his last lieutenant murmured. Stop talking, Dante yelled. We still have authority. The explosives are still with us. Do you? There was real wonder in Maggie's voice. Son, take another look at your monitors. Look, really. Finally realizing what he had missed, Dante gazed at his screens. He had never observed the intricate operation being carried out by veterans in the background of each feed. Not only were the maneuvers of each unit well coordinated, but they were also methodically denying him options. It's impossible, he said. How? It's not impossible, Maggie said coolly. Simply have experience. These lessons were taught to us in locations where errors could result in death. Where survival depended on precision more than winning. Through the grate, Adrian saw Dante's face light up with realization. The cartel boss was now coming to terms with the fact that he was up against more than just regular opponents. These were not merely veterans, they were experts in their field, carrying out a plan that had been refined in the most hostile battlegrounds on the planet. Cooper stated that the last teams were in place. All set for the third phase. Maggie took one final look at the tactical display, which showed not only the current state of affairs but also the remnants of many past actions. This was about demonstrating a better path, not just about thwarting a threat. She ordered all units to carry out Phase 3. Do you recall? Not only are we keeping them in check, but we're also demonstrating to them what actual battle is like. With each team working as a cohesive unit, the veterans started their last maneuvers. They were proving that actual combat expertise isn't about violence, not just about addressing a perilous situation. It's about being wise enough to use your opponent's power against them and patient enough to let them know that you have more experience than they do. A sequence of precisely timed power fluctuations across the compound marked the start of Phase 3. The emergency lights flickered, creating shaky shadows that gave the impression that everything was moving. In the subterranean storage area, Dante's remaining troops drew closer together, their fears ebbing with every second. One murmured, his weapon following shadows, they're in the walls, within the ceiling. Another said, everywhere, with wide eyes. They can be found anywhere. Dante's calm facade as a cartel leader was utterly destroyed when he gripped the detonator with shaking hands. Hold it together. The explosives are still with us. We are still in charge. Command. Kat's voice sounded as though it were coming from nowhere and everywhere. Son, let me explain control to you. 1968 in Saigon. With a full NVA battalion encircling us, our helicopter plummeted beyond enemy lines. What did I discover that day? What? Dante asked himself in spite of himself. Having the largest weapon is not the goal of that control. Whoever has the clearest mind wins. The last explosive charges were methodically isolated as Santiago's squad finished their last preparations. Quietly, he indicated that primary charges had disconnected, switching to a secondary network. Adrian led his team through the last approach in the ventilation system. He had learned every flaw in the compound's architecture from years of cartel activities. That information had a new function now. He murmured, maintenance junction ahead. We have access to the entire storage space from here. As the older teams advanced into last place, Cooper oversaw their movements. Every group was aware of their precise involvement in the impending event. This was more than a simple operation. It was an example of what had been seen in action after decades of war experience. It crackled on Dante's radio. Heath. The east sector was compromised. They are. The broadcast suddenly stopped. Dante shouted into his radio, "Report. Someone please report." "They can't," Kat's voice made plain. "They are quite preoccupied with figuring out what true tactical superiority looks like. Are you curious about the intriguing part? They have all been unharmed. Violence is not necessary to demonstrate our strength." Dante watched with increasing fear through his remaining security monitors as veterans appeared out of nowhere, each unit moving with unfathomable coordination. His men were being confined and segregated in a methodical manner, frequently without their knowledge. "Do you believe that this makes a difference?" The pressure in his voice cracked. "I have enough explosives left to." "To what end?" Kat softly cut in. "To pass away. To murder your own men. Son, look around you. Look, really. Consider your alternatives." When Dante finally saw what he had overlooked, he twirled in place. There were just 4 soldiers left in his surviving army, and they all appeared to be growing more unsure. Previously a fortress, the storage space now felt like a trap. His voice trembled as he said, "You can't win this. You can't." "I already have," Kat said coolly. "Examine the detonator." Dante looked down at the gadget he was holding. Once glowing a constant red, the ready light now pulsed weakly, indicating broken connections. "Not possible. The fees." After an hour of methodical isolation, Santiago's voice finally emerged. "We were teaching your own explosives to betray you while you were observing shadows." Adrian's group arrived at their destination. They could see Dante's increasing awareness that he had been outwitted on all fronts via the grates. Kat went on, "This is what real combat experience looks like," her voice brimming with decades of accumulated wisdom. "Nor violent force, nor terror, but the kind of accuracy that comes from repeatedly choosing life over death." The final lieutenant of Dante dropped his weapon. "Chief, it's over. We have been defeated without a shot being fired. That's true power." "No." The detonator was raised by Dante. "The master control is still in my possession, and I may still." Silently, the grating above him opened. Before he could respond, veterans poured in behind Adrian like smoke as he descended into the room with cat-like grace. "You don't, in fact," Adrian answered softly. "Examine the wiring panel." Dante's gaze flitted to the location of his explosive controls. Every link had been methodically broken during the psychological manipulation that had diverted his attention, leaving the panel dark. "It's impossible," he said. "What time did you?" "The whole time." With the quiet authority that had led troops through the most difficult fights in Vietnam, Kat's voice came from the doorway as she walked into the room. "We were educating you about true tactical dominance while you were waiting for an attack." Several cartel members crossed themselves as the silver in her hair was caught by the early sun shining through the high windows of the compound, producing a halo effect. They had heard tales of Saigon's Shadow Angel. They now knew why. "Now you have a choice, son," Kat murmured softly as she drew nearer. "But pick wisely. Whether you be remembered as the one who learned from failure or as the one who allowed hubris to ruin everything depends on the next few seconds." Veterans moved with seasoned precision to barricade the room, and Dante's hand tightened on the useless detonator. He was surrounded by the kind of military knowledge that only comes from actually fighting a war and coming out stronger, the kind that cannot be purchased or coerced. Like a wire on the verge of breaking, the moment stretched. In addition to Dante's fate, it contained a lesson on the distinction between people who used fear as a weapon and those who had overcome it via experience. Everything depended on the outcome. In the subterranean storage facility, time appeared to stand still. As Dante's eyes darted from face to face, his fingers shook on the detonator's trigger. Without moving forward or backward, the veterans held their places with disciplined practice. With the weight of many comparable moments in her voice, Kat replied softly, "Think about it. Think carefully. You've been using fear as a weapon your entire life. How is that doing at the moment? There was an undertone of frenzy in Dante's laugh. You believe you know what power is? Fear is the foundation of my kingdom. Adrian responded, taking a hesitant step forward, and we dismantled it without firing a shot. That is the mark of true strength. With a clear professional appraisal in his voice, Santiago moved to Adrian's side. I've worked on cartel operations, served in special forces, and witnessed all types of conflict. However, these veterans, they are demonstrating to us the characteristics of great tactical expertise. They could observe more cartel members being processed through the remaining security feeds from the facility. Not as inmates, but as individuals who are being given an option. Veterans demonstrated what true strength looked like by leading them with forceful but respected leadership. Your men are safe, said Kat. Each and every one. We made our point without resorting to violence. That is the distinction between knowing duty and utilizing fear. Dante's gaze flicked between the veterans encircling him and the worthless detonator. More eerie than any display of force could have been was their serene accuracy. These were not merely elderly troops. They were experts in their field, exhibiting knowledge that rendered his cartel strategies seem inexperienced. How? His voice cracked as he whispered. How did you accomplish this? The biggest dandies often come without firing a shot, Cooper responded, recalling what genuine battle taught us. Kat took another step forward, her silver hair catching the morning sun that was filtering through high windows. I discovered in Vietnam that preserving life is more difficult than taking them. Who can do the most harm isn't the true test of strength. Who can stop it is the question. Recalling his grandmother's remarks regarding many forms of power, Adrian felt the rosary beads at his neck. Now that he was seeing the veterans at work, he realized what she had meant. Don't worry, Chief, he whispered softly. They're guiding us in a better direction. Actual power. Genuine respect. Santiago gave a nod of assent. Take a look at their movements. How they were 10 steps ahead of themselves. It goes beyond experience. Mastery is that. Fighting for something greater than oneself can lead to a certain type of mastery. The weight of the detonator suddenly seemed too much to bear, and Dante's hand started to descend. Instead of Dante or defeat, he witnessed something unexpected all around him. Recognizing. With the forbearing eyes of warriors who had witnessed it all before, the veterans observed him. Finally, in a voice that was almost audible, he whispered, "You could have killed us. Anytime. Why didn't you?" "Because we're not like that," Kat said plainly. "We discovered the hard way that devastation isn't the path to true Dante. It has to do with change." Dante let go of the detonator, which fell to the ground with a harmless clatter. Veterans moved with practiced efficiency to secure it as if on cue. They moved precisely without seeming menacing. "Now what?" With an abruptly youthful tone, Dante inquired. "Right now." Decades of hard-won wisdom were reflected in Kat's smile. "You now understand what we discovered in Vietnam. That weapons aren't used in the fiercest battles. We battle them within ourselves." Other cartel members were making similar discoveries all over the compound. They marveled at the authority that veterans displayed without resorting to violence or threats. It was power gained with knowledge, experience, and the kind of power that strengthens rather than weakens. Cooper reported, "Sir. The compound is completely secured. Every explosive was neutralized. There were no casualties." In admiration of his profession, Santiago shook his head. "I have worked in special operations for many years, and I have never seen anything like this. We weren't just defeated by you. You made us realize what we ought to have been all along." As the immediate danger was overcome, the morning sun rose higher over Ironridge. However, something else was starting to emerge in the faces of the cartel members as they gradually came to terms with what they had seen. A change that would extend well beyond a single town or complex. Adrian could see it in the way his old co-workers observed the veterans at work. With increasing respect, not fear. Genuine respect. Earned by proving genuine professional skill rather than via coercion. What comes next, do you know? Kat asked everyone in the room. Something more difficult than fighting. Something greater than triumph. What is that? Dante inquired. His previous bluster was replaced by sincere interest. Gaining the ability to deserve the second opportunity that has been granted to you. Real strength, it turns out, isn't about intimidating others. Being someone people can trust is the key. The last sweep of the facility was started by the veterans. Their motions were still perfectly timed, but they had a new objective. They were no longer only securing a site. They were establishing a foundation for something more significant. They were demonstrating that there was always a way to find redemption, even in the wake of possible catastrophe. There is always a way to turn a loss into something more worthwhile than a win. As the veterans started to analyze the surrender of the compound, Ironridge was illuminated by bright noontime sunlight. The military accuracy was not what most surprised observers. It was the respect they showed their erstwhile rivals. Every cartel member received the same level of respect and the same chance to start over. Rose was amazed to see veterans working with former cartel members in McCarthy's cafe, which is now a debriefing center. Not as captors holding captives, but as seasoned experts pointing others in the direction of betterment. She told Hannah Mitchell she had never seen anything like it. They're doing more than simply digesting them. They're learning from them. As she observed Adrian working with a group of younger cartel members, Hannah nodded. They are demonstrating to them the qualities of true authority. Not aggression, not fear, just unadulterated professional skill. With a new purpose for his military experience, Santiago interviewed his former men at a corner table. He questioned each person, "Tell me what you saw in there. Share your knowledge of actual tactical operations with me." It was surprising how consistent the responses were. According to a former cartel soldier, they moved like shadows. It was more than just their movement, though. They were thinking. They were 10 steps ahead at all times. Santiago clarified, because they've done this before. It is against actual armies, not cartels. They attended the most difficult school imaginable to learn their trade. As more soldiers arrived to help guard the town, Kat worked with Cooper outside the diner. Every squad moved with the same accuracy that had won the day, blending in perfectly with the operation. Cooper said he was receiving complaints from 3 more communities. Word of what transpired here is getting out. Already, other cartel activities are retreating and re-evaluating. Of course they are, said Kat. We stopped more than one attack. We showed strength of a different sort. The kind that turns foes into friends. Under the watchful eyes of veterans who regarded him with professional civility rather than contempt, Dante sat in the space that had been his office. He began to comprehend what true tactical superiority looked like as he observed their movements and cooperation. Finally, he said, "I don't understand. We had everything, we had the explosives, the firearms. How could you have beaten us so thoroughly?" Adrian said, bringing in new coffee, "Because you were fighting the wrong battle. You believed it to be about terror and force. They demonstrated to us that knowledge and comprehension are key." Veterans started the first stage of what would become known as the Ironridge program in the main hall of the property, which is today used as a training space. As the veterans displayed not only strategies but also values, former cartel members observed and gained knowledge. A seasoned teacher informed the assembled group that it was the first class. Creating dread in others is not a sign of true strength. Being someone people can trust is the key. With a renewed sense of purpose, Santiago navigated the compound, his expert evaluation weighing heavily on both sides. He told a gathering of veteran operatives that what we saw here was more than a tactical win. It served as a master lesson in actual combat skills. The town outside seemed to come alive with fresh vitality. People came out of their houses with increasing confidence rather than dread. They observed how former cartel members and veterans collaborated to clear explosives, fix damage, and bring order back. Maggie told a group of community officials that this is what true transformation looks like, not just halting the threat, but turning it into something positive. Hannah Mitchell explained what had transpired in Ironridge and cooperated with state officials. They must comprehend, she told Maggie. This goes beyond a single town or cartel. Showing that there is a better method is the goal here. More guests, law enforcement from nearby towns, military observers, and community leaders looking for answers arrived in the afternoon. They discovered a transformational blueprint in addition to a triumphant tale. Adrian pointed to the area where veterans led ex-cartel members through security procedures and said, "Watch how they work. They are teaching responsibility, professionalism, and true strength, not just tactics." Maggie and Steele started sketching the future in what had been the cartel's planning room. Other towns with comparable problems and communities in need of the same kind of change were indicated with pins. Cooper stated that they are already referring to it as the Ironridge model. The governors of 3 states have asked to be briefed on our procedures. Maggie responded, because we showed them something they didn't expect. We demonstrated to them that competence, not more violence, is the solution to violence. The kind of strength that comes from actual fighting experience is understanding. The facility hummed with deliberate activity as dusk drew near. Veterans collaborated with once adversaries, with both parties gaining knowledge from one another. Understanding a new type of power was the goal of the change, not merely switching sides. Do you realize what the true triumph is? As they observed the procedure, Maggie questioned Steele. Not saving the town, not stopping the cartel. It's demonstrating to all parties involved that there's always a better way to go. The sky was painted in colors of promise as the sun started to drop over Ironridge. New lessons were being learnt in the facility that had once stood for terror. They were building new strength. And in the faces of the people who had seen it all, veterans, ex-cartel members, and townspeople, there was a rising realization that what had transpired in Ironridge was a beginning rather than merely a conclusion. The old cartel compound was changed when dawn broke over Ironridge. Veterans now led training sessions with military accuracy where armed guards formerly paced menacingly. The Ironridge program's first official day had started. Be economical with your movements, Adrian told a group of ex-cartel members. Being intimidating is a waste of energy for true experts. They concentrate on being efficient. Santiago collaborated with a different team, using his military background to bridge the gap between experienced knowledge and cartel methods. He pointed to the areas where veterans patrolled and said, "Notice how they maintain awareness. They are totally in charge of their space, they are neither hostile nor menacing." Kat examined reports from nearby areas at the command center, which was now used as a teaching center. As news of what had transpired here spread, Cooper declared that 3 major cartels were withdrawing from their territory. More importantly, Kat answered, words of transformation and what's happening here now spreading. The training sessions in the morning showed the veterans all-encompassing strategy. Former cartel members acquired principles in addition to tactics and procedures. Every lesson built on the one before it, fostering comprehension as opposed to merely following instructions. A seasoned teacher told his students that there are 2 types of authority. The sort that comes from true respect and the kind that requires continual threats to be maintained. Can you guess which one endures longer? Ironridge itself, beyond the compound, was evolving. People from the town who had previously rushed by with sad looks now paused to observe the instruction, realizing that their former tormentors were learning a better way. Hannah Mitchell told a group of visiting law enforcement officers that it's not just about security. It's about transforming fear into trust and transforming communities. Rose marveled at the transformation as she served coffee to a mix of ex-cartel members and veterans in McCarthy's cafe. These men had threatened her business only days before. They now read professional security procedure manuals, asked questions, and had a sincere interest in learning. Observing the merger, James Steele noted that it was remarkable. They are embracing the change rather than merely accepting it. Because we're giving them something they didn't have, Maggie said. Actual purpose, actual professional identity. The first test of the new program was conducted in the afternoon. To evaluate the situation, a competing cartel dispatched observers. They discovered a demonstration of professional expertise that made their own operations appear amateurish, rather than disorder or weakness. As the observers were deftly intercepted by veterans, Adrian instructed his students to watch and learn. There was no exhibition of guns or threats, only cool, collected professionalism that made it clear who was in charge. Santiago clarified that this is how actual experts respond to possible dangers. Quiet expertise, without any pretension or drama. Maggie started creating the program's main curriculum in the training hall. Every component was derived from hard-won battle expertise and modified for civilian use. It was about transformation, not just strategies. She told a group of instructors that the secret is to demonstrate to them that true strength isn't about instilling terror in others. It all comes down to being dependable. Dante, who was still being monitored but was now participating in the program, watched the training with increasing comprehension. We believed we were experts, he said to Santiago. However, this is a very different matter. Santiago answered, because they learned their trade in real war. Where success meant saving lives and failure meant death. Change is your perspective on everything. Teamwork and coordination were the main topics of the advanced classes in the afternoon. The smooth collaboration that had won the struggle in the facility was exhibited by veterans. Former cartel members who were accustomed to using force and terror started to comprehend a new form of power. Observe their movements, Adrian said. No showcasing, no wasted effort, just unadulterated professional effectiveness. More guests arrived as evening drew near. Law enforcement officers, military observers, and local leaders from other towns. They discovered a thorough transformation effort in addition to a security operation. Cooper told the guests the Ironridge approach isn't simply about thwarting cartels. It's about giving everyone a better route. Maggie examined inquiries from other towns dealing with comparable issues in her office. Every folder offered a chance for change in addition to a security issue. She informed Steele that we would require additional teachers. More veterans are eager to share their knowledge. I already have volunteers, he said. Through experienced networks, word is getting out. It's referred to be the next stage of service. The training fields were covered in lengthy shadows as the sun descended over Ironridge. In order to create something new from the ashes of battle, former adversaries collaborate, learning and teaching. Do you realize what the true obstacle will be? As they saw the evening training sessions, Maggie questioned Cooper. Not just imparting the necessary skills but also assisting them in realizing the accountability that accompanies true strength. Groups continued to practice and learn as the compound lights came on. Something that had never been there before was in their faces. Pride, the genuine pride of gaining knowledge, not the phony pride of intimidating. They were creating a transformational paradigm in addition to a program. A method of transforming anxiety into professional respect and disagreement into cooperation. The lessons persisted as night descended on Ironridge, each one demonstrating that the most difficult triumphs are not achieved by coercion. They are gained by patience, understanding, and the kind of strength that strengthens rather than weakens. Ironridge's metamorphosis started to spread like pond ripples a week after the complex gave up. 3 nearby communities, each dealing with cartel issues, had asked for assistance in putting the scheme into action. Maggie was standing in the main hall of the training center, speaking to the first Ironridge model graduating class. There is more to what you have learned here than just security. She informed the former cartel members gathered there. It's about accountability, about having the kind of strength that strengthens rather than divides communities. With silent pride, Adrian, who is now the lead instructor, observed his first class of pupils. Each had learned the deeper meaning of professional capability and had changed from enforcer to guardian. Cooper joined Maggie after the ceremony and said that Cedar Grove had called again. The problem with their cartel is becoming worse. They are requesting prompt action. Maggie said, "Show me," and walked up to the tactical display. Several red pins on the map now indicated communities in distress, each of which could serve as a showcase for their novel strategy. Rose arranged for former cartel members and local business owners to meet in McCarthy's Diner, which is now a community outreach center. There was a noticeable shift in the dynamics from threats and fear to professional conversation. As she watched the exchange, Hannah Mitchell noted that they weren't simply switching jobs. They are evolving into better versions of themselves. With his military background bridging the gap between veteran expertise and street knowledge, Santiago led a training session for the upcoming generation of instructors. He clarified that demonstrating to them that genuine power does not require threats is crucial. Competence is the source of it. The Ironridge initiative was officially recognized as a model for community development in the afternoon, according to reports from the state capitol. However, recognition also brought with it new difficulties. Cooper stated that the Los Diablos cartel is aggressively opposing the transition in an effort to hold on to their territory by disparaging our grads. Maggie quietly said, as expected. Old power is never easily defeated. We're not just training individuals because of this. We are constructing networks. Dante, who was now totally dedicated to the program, worked with several new converts. He advised them to think of fear as strength and to remember how it felt. Now see how actual experts work. Can you see the difference? They observed a training exercise being led by veterans, whose movements demonstrated the kind of quiet competence that eliminated the need for threats. Every action has a purpose. Every stance is backed by decades of actual combat experience. During the nightly briefing, Adrian announced that he was receiving reports from Crawford County. They have deeper political ties and distinct, more established cartel scenarios. Maggie said, different circumstances, same principles. No matter the situation, true power always appears the same. Community integration was the main topic of the evening's advanced class. In addition to learning security protocols, former cartel members also taught how to become true community assets. Santiago clarified to his group that their prior experience was not useless. It is worth a lot. You are aware of the dangers and trends. You're now learning how to apply that knowledge to prevent rather than to take advantage of. Maggie assessed more veterans' applications to join the program in her office. Each contributed a distinct battle experience. Each was aware of the transformation's larger purpose. According to James Steele, it's known in military circles as the Shadow Angel Initiative. Nationwide, word is getting out through veteran networks. The compound beyond, which had previously stood for terror, now hummed with deliberate activity. Under floodlights, training sessions went on, each time reiterating the program's central thesis that professional expertise, not intimidation, is the source of true strength. Cooper pointed out that Cedar Grove is unique. According to reports, their cartels have improved in sophistication and weaponry. It doesn't matter, said Maggie. We're not engaged in combat. We're demonstrating a better approach to them. Similar to what we accomplished here. The last exercise of the evening showed the progress of the program. In a difficult security scenario, former cartel members collaborated with veterans, demonstrating increasing professional maturity in their motions. Adrian instructed observers from neighboring communities to observe their synchronization. That goes beyond training. That's comprehension. They're understanding it more deeply. The changes were just as significant in town. Once quiet after dark, the streets were now a hive of community activity, guarded by program alumni who were aware of their new responsibility. Hannah told visiting officials that security isn't the only consideration. Restoration is the goal, and all who contributed to the issue should be included in the solution. Problems with logistics, training capacity, and opposition from powerful interests were all brought on by the expansion. But the same systematic strategy that had prevailed in the Compound War was applied to every obstacle. Do you realize what the true triumph is? During the evening debrief, Maggie inquired. Not only about changing people, not simply about stopping cartels. Communities are being shown that there is always a better way. Maggie watched teams rehearse under the lights at her office window as midnight drew near. She observed real metamorphosis in their motions, not just acquired skills. They weren't merely going through the motions. They were adopting a new persona. She informed Cooper that this was only the beginning. Each graduate serves as a seed for future transformation. Every success story demonstrates that it is possible. In the facility that had formerly been the site of cartel operations, the work went on as the night grew darker over Ironridge. There was a new power emerging. Not the power of violence and terror, but the power of earned respect, professional skill, and true change. Additionally, there was something new in the faces of individuals who were learning this new method. I hope. Not only for themselves, but for all the communities that continue to be impacted by cartel domination. They were creating something that would last beyond their lifetimes. An example of transforming adversaries into allies, fear into professional respect, and conflict into cooperation. One lesson at a time, one town, one individual. The program's expansion started, and Cedar Grove hit a breaking point 2 weeks later. The local cartel made a number of harsh actions to keep power after refusing to accept the changes that were occurring in the area. Standing in the command center, Maggie's examined reports with the same composed attention to detail that she had displayed in Vietnam. Cooper said they're pushing hard. Threats against companies, repeated attempts at intimidation, and attempts to demonstrate that the Ironridge model won't work there. Maggie said, that's precisely why it will. They are demonstrating to everyone the need for change. Program graduates and seasoned teachers gathered for the morning briefing. The scenario was explained by Adrian, who is currently the coordinator of field operations. He clarified the differences between Ironridge and Cedar Grove. Their cartel is more sophisticated and well-established. They believe that strengthens them. Santiago went on to say that it actually makes people more vulnerable. There are more pressure points and chances to demonstrate a better way when there are more connections. The response team, which was made up of veterans and reformed cartel members, moved with a common goal despite lacking practice. Each was aware of their part in showcasing a particular strength. Maggie's told them to keep in mind their training. We will not engage in combat. We're entering to demonstrate to them what true professional competence entails. Dante, in charge of one of the response teams, gave his squad a briefing. He had changed dramatically. His dual role as a skilled lecturer and cartel boss makes him exceptionally valuable. They'll anticipate violence, threats, and the typical cartel reaction. He informed his group. We show them something they have never seen before instead. Complete professionalism without being intimidating. The procedure started with typical accuracy. Teams entered Cedar Grove with a planned goal rather than with violent demonstrations. Every movement illustrated the fundamental ideas of the program. Hannah Mitchell advised observers from various communities to observe how they integrate. Working together, former adversaries demonstrate what true transformation looks like. The first challenge from the Cedar Grove cartels was an attempted force display in the town center around noon. Instead of seeing armed opposition, they encountered a coordinated, expert response that rendered their strategies appear inexperienced. Watching officials were alerted by Santiago to their placement. Pure tactical superiority, no needless aggression, no wasted movement. Rose organized a community support coordination center in McCarthy's Diner. After meeting with Ironridge grads, business owners from Cedar Grove witnessed firsthand how former cartel members may turn into community defenders. Share your newfound knowledge with others. Kat gave her graduates encouragement. Prove to them that being strong isn't about intimidating others. Becoming someone people can trust is the goal. In an effort to scare Cedar Grove's council into rejecting the proposal, the cartels made their main push in the afternoon. They were confronted with a display of expert skill that made it clear which strategy was better. As they observed the cartel members take in what they were witnessing, Adrian said to Cooper, "Look at their faces. We all came to the same realization. Being powerful can be done better." With systematic efficiency, the procedure proceeded. Each crew expertly carried out their assigned tasks, demonstrating to Cedar Grove what true security looked like. Through coordinated professional expertise, not through violence or threats. Cooper updated after receiving reports from other cartels. They're keeping a careful eye on this to see how their typical strategies fall short in the face of actual training. From the mobile command center, Kat kept an eye on the situation, directing actions with the same cool command that had led men through the bloodiest combat in Vietnam. Every choice illustrated the program's core tenet, which is that knowledge, not fear, is the source of true power. According to Santiago, the third cartel gang was retreating. They are beginning to see how they fall short of our professional expectations. The pivotal moment in the operation came in the evening. The leadership of Cedar Grove's cartel, confronted with the same decision Dante had to make, saw their power erode via greater talent rather than violence. "Don't you see it now?" Dante spoke to his old co-workers. The distinction between appearing strong and actually being strong. Between gaining respect and utilizing terror. Residents of Cedar Grove observed the change with increasing optimism. There was a new presence on the streets that had previously been dominated by intimidation. Competent, professional, and protecting rather than menacing. Hannah told town leaders that this is what true change looks like. Demonstrating a more effective method of upholding order rather than merely substituting one force for another. The outcomes became evident as darkness fell. The cartel in Cedar Grove had to contend with a total paradigm shift in addition to tactical dominance. Their violent and fear-based power was insufficient to match true professional expertise. What are they actually seeing, do you know? During the evening debrief, Maggie inquired. Not merely improved training or strategies. When strength is founded on something other than fear, they are witnessing what true strength looks like. Every element of the Ironridge model was validated by the operation's success. Every team, graduate, and veteran had proven that change wasn't merely conceivable. When true experts led the way, it was unavoidable. Cooper said there were reports from 3 more communities. They are asking for the program to be implemented right away. Word of what transpired here is getting out. Quietly satisfied, Maggie went over the day's results in her makeshift office. Now, the flag that had begun it all flew over a movement that was transforming entire areas, not just people or towns. During the last briefing, she told her teams that this is what true Dante looks like. Guiding adversaries toward a better path rather than defeating them. Motivating change rather than imposing it. For the first time in months, Cedar Grove enjoyed a peaceful night. Protected by professional competence rather than fear. There was something new in the looks of former cartel members now acting as guards of the town. Pride. The true pride of earned respect, not the phony pride of intimidation. They had demonstrated that the Ironridge approach was more than a local fix. It served as a model for change that could be implemented anyplace individuals were prepared to make a better decision. The governor's administration officially announced Cedar Grove's makeover a month later. In order to combat cartel influence in distressed communities, the Ironridge model would eventually become state policy. Maggie's subdued demeanor attracted more attention than any uniform when she appeared in front of a group of state representatives and law enforcement chiefs. "We've developed more than just a security program," she said. "It serves as a model for transforming communities and empowering those who contributed to the issue to serve as the cornerstone of the solution." The Regional Transformation Academy, the new name for the training facility, was bustling with activity. Veterans and program alumni collaborated, each contributing a distinct viewpoint to the training of new teachers. Adrian said to a group of visiting authorities, "You can see the difference. We're teaching them how to be the type of strength their communities need, not simply how to do it." By working with military liaison officers, Santiago assisted in bridging the gap between the program's creative approach and traditional law enforcement. He clarified that the secret is realizing that skill, not fear, is the source of true authority. Cooper examined reports from other states that were using the model at the command center, which had been enlarged to manage regional operations. He said that 7 big cartels were pulling out of areas. They realized they lacked the really professional skills to compete. Because we're not merely switching strategies, Kat said. In these communities, we are completely altering the power dynamics. A demonstration for national security personnel took place in the afternoon. As a demonstration of the smooth transition of formerly rivals into a professional force, graduate teams collaborated with seasoned educators. Dante, a senior instructor now, instructed the observers to keep an eye on their motions. No pointless work, no intimidating gestures, just unadulterated professionalism. In order to help law enforcement agencies throughout the state comprehend the program's underlying ideas, Hannah Mitchell coordinated with them. "It's not about being the toughest person or having the most weapons," she clarified. "Being the most dependable and professional is the goal." Rose brought together business owners from all over the area in McCarthy's diner. Each told how the initiative had changed their community's whole fabric, not simply their security. "Do you recall how it was?" a store owner inquired. "Paying protection money while living in terror. Look, our guardians are members of the community. Not those we fear, but those we trust." The program's development was demonstrated during the nightly training sessions. While fundamental ideas stayed the same, new methods integrated insights from every successful deployment. Maggie informed her teachers that the basics remain the same. Professionalism and gaining respect via skill rather than fear are the hallmarks of true power. Big cartels faced an unprecedented challenge as their power dwindled. Their conventional methods of assault and intimidation against the program's alumni did not work. Cooper stated during the evening briefing that they are attempting to adjust. Even sending members through the program is a question that some people are questioning. They are, of course, Maggie said. They realize that causing the most fear isn't the true measure of power. Who can gain the most trust is the key. Communities that had previously been under cartel influence started to change all over the region. There was a new presence on the streets that had previously been dominated by fear. Competent, professional, and protecting rather than menacing. Hannah said, "It's like watching a weight lift. Not only are these towns safer, they're starting to come back to life." A thorough briefing on the program's approach was sought by the Office of the National Security Advisor. Maggie was ready to offer the core idea that underpinned the Ironridge model's success, in addition to the methods. They must realize that this isn't just about security measures, she informed her colleagues. The goal is to change the way that communities view protection and strength. Maggie went over preparations for the program's nationwide growth as night fell. Every pin on the map symbolized both a community in distress and a chance for change. "What are they actually requesting, do you know?" Cooper was asked. "Not only tactics or training. They desire what we have shown to be feasible. That societies have the capacity to turn their biggest dangers into their greatest assets." Class after class of new protectors graduated as the training center carried on with its operations under the lights. Every graduate had a new identity in addition to new abilities. Professional, competent, and deserving of the confidence they had previously violated. As they observed the nighttime exercises, Adrian said to Santiago, "Look at their faces. You're witnessing more than simply training. That is the act of redemption." Now, the flag that had begun it all was flying over a movement that was transforming neighborhood security across the country. More than that, though, it ignored a known fact. Fear and violence are not the sources of that true strength. It can be found in the professionalism to gain trust, the bravery to adapt, and the discernment to put safety before threats. Not only was the Ironridge model working, it was changing the definition of success in community transformation. Margaret Holloway stood at the same flagpole outside her colonial home 1 year to the day after Dante Reyes attempted to burn her flag. Ironridge's main street was covered in the typical shadows of the morning sun, but everything else was different. There was now purpose where there had been fear. There was protection now where there had been danger. Cooper joined her in raising the flag in the morning and remarked, "It's hard to believe it's been a year." Graduates of the program carried out their morning patrols around them with expert accuracy. With her hands working with the same military precision that had led helicopters through the toughest combat in Vietnam, Kat responded that sometimes the smallest moments may bring about the biggest transformations. Representatives from 30 states attended the Regional Transformation Academy, which is now a nationally renowned training facility. Each had learned not only tactics but the underlying ideology that had transformed adversaries into allies. Adrian, who is now a master instructor himself, told his most recent class to show them. Demonstrate to them what true professional competence looks like. His pupils, a blend of law enforcement personnel and former cartel members, executed their drills with seamless cooperation. A year ago, Rose would never have been able to serve coffee to a crowd in McCarthy's Diner, now a historic stop for visiting politicians. With a common goal, veterans sat next to repentant cartel members, community leaders next to former enemies. Do you recall that morning when Maggie stood by herself against them? Rose questioned Hannah Mitchell. This was above our wildest expectations. Through the window, Hannah observed Dante, who is currently in charge of community integration for the program, giving a briefing to officials from Newtown. Hannah answered that she wasn't standing by herself. She was simply aware of it before the rest of us. A ceremony that took place in the afternoon made headlines across the country. The Ironridge model was formally accepted by the Department of Justice as the federal standard for community transformation initiatives. Maggie and Santiago, who are now acknowledged as trailblazing authorities in their respective domains, shared the podium. Maggie informed the gathering, "What we've built here isn't just about security. It's about realizing that fear and violence aren't the sources of true strength. It can be found in having the guts to adapt, the professionalism to gain people's trust, and the discernment to defend rather than threaten." The change was total and irreversible across Ironridge. Once quiet under cartel rule, the streets were suddenly alive with local activity. Companies that had previously paid protection funds now made training program contributions. Children increasingly looked up to protectors after hiding from danger. Do you realize what the true triumph is? At the evening meeting, James Steele inquired. Not merely changing communities or putting an end to the cartels. It is demonstrating that there is always a better way to do things and a way to get back on track. Dante knew that truth better than others, standing alongside his own graduating class of teachers. He informed them, "A year ago, I believed that being strong meant making people fear you. I get it now. Being trustworthy is a sign of true power." The lights that formerly lighted cartel operations were used for the training center's evening drills. Every move, exercise, and instruction showed not only tactical skill but also a deeper comprehension. Santiago instructed visiting military observers to examine their movements. "You're witnessing more than simply training. That is the manifestation of transformation." Maggie was in her office going over reports from all throughout the country. Ironridge was setting an example for communities that had previously been governed by cartels. She had established a movement that had taken on a life of its own, bringing change and optimism wherever it went. The final figures have been released. According to Cooper, participating villages saw a 90% decrease in crime, 87 neighborhoods were transformed, and over 2,000 former cartel members graduated. As she watched the evening training through her window, Maggie retorted, "The real story isn't told by numbers. Their expressions and their perception of what true strength looks like tell the true tale. The flag that had begun it all was still flying with pride and strength when night fell over Ironridge. Now, however, it stood for more than the rebellion of one lady or the change of one town. For communities all throughout the country, it had come to represent hope. What will people remember, do you know? During the last ceremony, Maggie inquired. Not the strategies, not the methods. They'll keep in mind that true power isn't about causing destruction. Building them involves gaining their trust rather than inciting fear. Faces from each of the story's chapters were present at the event. Rose McCarthy, whose cafe had come to represent the healing of the town. Hannah Mitchell, who had contributed to bridging the transformational and law enforcement divide. Santiago and Adrian had demonstrated that understanding, not coercion, is the key to true change. Each had contributed to demonstrating that turning adversaries into allies rather than defeating them yields the greatest gains. The ability to lead others in a better way is what truly defines strength, not guns or threats. Maggie stood at her flagpole again as midnight drew near on the anniversary of that crucial morning. They gazed down on a different globe, but the same stars were shining overhead. A world where threat had been defeated by protection, where transformation had triumphed over fear, and where professional skill had supplanted intimidation. She touched the pole that had initiated it all and whispered, "One flag. One defiant moment, one opportunity to demonstrate a different path." The sound of academy training, protectors honing their skills, and communities discovering their might was carried by the night breeze. Above it all, the flag fluttered in the breeze, its stars and stripes now symbolizing not only the bravery of a single woman but also the nation's realization of what true power looks like. The conflict that started with a single burned flag had grown into something significant, a movement that demonstrated that true power comes from building trust rather than inciting fear. Not by shattering spirits, but by changing them. Not by standing by yourself, but by demonstrating to others how to unite in support of a cause bigger than themselves. 2 more amazing tales await you directly on your screen in the next section. You won't want to miss these if you like this one. Simply click to view, and remember to subscribe. A lot would be at stake.
Disclaimer. This channel stands against all forms of intolerance, discrimination, racism, and violations of human rights. The stories shared here are original creations, developed to encourage reflection, understanding, and constructive dialogue. All content is produced with a commitment to respecting diversity and honoring human dignity.